I didn't want to die in a room full of diamonds. It felt tacky somehow, bleeding out on the plush carpet of a Seoul auction house while billionaires bid on stolen artifacts. The chandeliers blurred into streaks of light above me, the edges of my vision graying, shrinking the world down to a narrow tunnel. My hand pressed hard against my side, fingers sticky with warmth that the black fabric of my gown mercifully hid. 48 hours since I broke the digital lock, 2 miles of running in heels. I caught my reflection in a passing glass display case, eyes wide and haunted, skin gleaming with cold sweat, the elegance of the evening wear unable to hide the trembling of my limbs. I used to be someone, Zariah Mitchell, senior cybersecurity analyst, a prodigy. Now I was just a ghost in the machine, a living ledger carrying secrets that powerful men would kill to keep quiet. The double doors swung open, letting in a draft of air that smelled of money and danger. The chatter in the room died instantly. Champagne glasses stopped clinking. People parted like the Red Sea, fear rippling through the crowd. I looked up. He moved through the chaos like he owned the silence. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit that cost more than my life. His expression was calm, almost bored, but his posture radiated a controlled violence. Choi Sung-ho, the supreme head of the syndicate, the devil himself. I tried to reach him, to beg. My legs gave out, the floor rushed up, but I never hit it. An arm like an iron bar caught me mid-collapse, pulling me against a chest that was solid, unyielding. The scent of sandalwood and cold rain filled my senses, foreign and overwhelming. "Steady," a deep voice commanded, low and vibrationless. Then his hand brushed my neck to check my pulse, and everything changed. I drifted in the gray space between pain and nothingness, aware only of the expansive wool of his suit against my cheek. When his fingers brushed the hair away from my neck, I felt his body go rigid. The scars, the fresh bruising. I tried to pull away, adrenaline flaring weakly, but I was paralyzed by exhaustion. His gaze shifted down, not with indifference, but with a terrifying focus. He saw it. The Viper brand burned into my collarbone, the jagged mark that defined me as property of a rogue faction. Something in him went absolute zero, freezing rage. "Who marked you?" he asked, his voice quiet enough to be a secret, heavy enough to be a death sentence. I couldn't speak. I could only tremble. He didn't need an answer. His eyes scanned the room, locking onto the shadows where my pursuers waited, his jaw clenching as he calculated their demise. When he looked back at me, the boredom was gone. "Seal the exits," he ordered his men, not looking away from my face. "Sir, the auction. Burn it down if you have to. No one leaves." He lifted me into his arms effortlessly, striding past his terrified guests as his security detail formed a phalanx around us. "They're coming," I whispered, my voice cracking. "The Viper." "I ordered that ring dismantled 3 years ago," he murmured, his grip tightening protectively. "Someone is going to bleed for this resurrection." The armored SUV waited at the curb, an impenetrable fortress. He settled me inside, his presence filling the space, terrifying yet safer than anywhere I had been in years. "You're mine now," he said. It sounded like a threat. It felt like salvation. As the car tore away into the Seoul night, I realized the most dangerous man in the city hadn't caught me to kill me. He had caught me to avenge me. The air in the room didn't smell like the damp tunnels or the metallic tang of the auction house. It smelled of ozone, expensive linen, and antiseptic. Zariah opened her eyes, bracing for the sting of a fluorescent bulb, but the light was soft, recessed into a ceiling that looked more like an architectural masterpiece than a hospital. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pull in her side forced a gasp from her lungs. "Don't. The stitches are fresh." The voice was a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate the very glass of the water carafe on the bedside table. Zariah turned her head slowly. Choi Sung-ho sat in a high-backed leather chair in the corner, his silhouette cutting a sharp, lethal edge against the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the neon veins of Seoul. He had removed his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like they were carved from marble, yet his composure remained terrifyingly absolute. "Where am I?" she whispered, her throat feeling like it had been scraped with glass. "A place where the people hunting you cannot go," he replied, standing up. He moved with a predatory grace, closing the distance between them until he stood over her. He didn't look at her with pity, he looked at her like a puzzle he intended to solve. "You crashed a private gala, collapsed into the arms of a man you've never met, and carried a brand on your collarbone that shouldn't exist. I gave the order to burn the Viper faction to the ground 3 years ago. Imagine my surprise when one of their ghosts falls at my feet." Zariah felt the weight of his gaze, a physical pressure that demanded the truth. She reached up, her fingers grazing the fresh bandage over her collarbone. "They didn't burn," she said, her voice gaining a thin edge of defiance. "They just moved into the dark. They've been building a shadow empire, Mr. Choi, using your roots, your codes, and your money." Sung-ho's eyes narrowed, a flash of something cold and lethal flickering in the dark depths of his iris. "And what are you to them? A trophy? A message?" "A ledger," Zariah corrected, meeting his stare. The fear was there, but the survival instinct she'd honed over months of captivity was stronger. They didn't trust digital servers for the high-level accounts, not after you started monitoring the traffic. They needed something they could move, something that couldn't be hacked, so they made me memorize it. Every transaction, every crypto key, every bribe paid to your own lieutenants. She saw the exact moment his expression shifted from curiosity to a focused, predatory intent. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, the scent of cedar and cold rain suddenly overwhelming. "You're telling me you have the keys to my brother's betrayal locked inside your head?" "I don't just have the keys," Zariah whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I am the vault, and right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and a coup." Sung-ho remained silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a touch that was surprisingly steady. "Then it seems, Zariah, that you are the most valuable thing in this city, and I have never been good at letting go of what belongs to me." The silence in the room was heavier than it had been before Zariah spoke. Sung-ho didn't move, he simply stared at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering neon of the city below. The information was a blade, sharp and familiar, twisting in a wound he hadn't known was open. He stood abruptly, the leather of his chair groaning under the sudden shift, and walked to a sleek console built into the wall. With a few keystrokes, he pulled up the syndicate's internal logistics. He traced the movement of funds, the ghost shipments, and the security bypasses that had occurred over the last quarter. Every trail ended at the same digital doorstep, Park Ji-hoon, his sworn brother, the man who had stood beside him during the bloody purge of the Viper faction 3 years ago, the man who had apparently spent those 3 years harvesting the survivors to build a kingdom of his own. The betrayal felt like a cold stone in his gut. In the world of the Cheon-Sa Syndicate, blood was the only currency that mattered, and Ji-hoon had just devalued it to 0. "Rest," Sung-ho commanded, his voice devoid of its usual clinical calm. It was rougher now, dangerous. He left the room without a backward glance, the heavy door hissing shut and locking with a definitive electronic thud. He moved to his private study and activated the security feed for the medical suite. He expected to see her sleeping, exhausted by the revelation. Instead, he found Zariah Mitchell sitting on the edge of the bed. She was pale, her hand clutching her stitched side, but her eyes were narrowed in fierce concentration. She had managed to snag a surgical probe from a nearby tray and was currently hunched over the electronic door lock, her fingers moving with the precision of a master clockmaker. She wasn't just a ledger, she was a survivor. Even with a fever burning through her and a fresh wound in her side, she was trying to claw her way back to the shadows. He watched her for several minutes, mesmerized by the sheer, stubborn resilience of a woman who refused to be anyone's prisoner. "She's too exposed here," Sung-ho murmured to the empty room. If Ji-hoon knew she was alive, and he surely did, the medical wing was a target. But more than that, Sung-ho felt a strange, possessive pull. He didn't want her in a guest suite. He wanted her where he could see her. He tapped the intercom. "Prepare the inner sanctum, and send the head of security to my office. We're moving the guest." He watched the screen one last time as Zariah nearly tripped the lock, a small, triumphant smirk ghosting her lips, before her strength flickered and she slumped back against the pillows. She was a warrior in silk and bandages, and for the first time in years, Choi Sung-ho felt the thrill of a hunt that wasn't about money, it was about blood. The transition from the medical suite to the inner sanctum was a blur of silent security teams and pressurized elevator rides. Zariah now sat in a room that felt less like a hospital and more like the bridge of a warship, sleek, dark, and reinforced with layers of ballistic glass. Across from her, Sung-ho stood by a desk of polished obsidian, his silhouette framed by the glowing grid of Seoul's skyline. "The medical records say you haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks," he said, his voice cutting through the hum of the room's servers. "Why?" "Because when I sleep, I see the faces of the ones who didn't get out," Zariah replied, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "Ji-hoon isn't just stealing your money, Mr. Choi. He's using your infrastructure to move state secrets to the highest bidder, and he's using women as the physical carriers for the drives. I was the one who had to encrypt the data into their biometric signatures. I'm the only one who knows the sequence to unlock it without killing the host." Sung-ho's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping in his cheek. The betrayal was no longer just financial. It was a stain on the syndicate's code. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the burden of 1,000 secrets etched into the exhaustion behind her eyes. "I have the master keys," she continued, leaning forward, her hands clenched in her lap. "I have the account numbers, the offshore routing, and the names of the buyers. I'll give it all to you, every bite. In exchange, I want a clean identity and a ticket out of this city. I want to go home. I want to forget Seoul ever existed." Sung-ho walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the heavy carpet. He stopped inches from her chair, a towering presence of shadow and authority. He reached out, not to strike, but to lift her chin so she was forced to meet his gaze. His eyes were no longer cold, they were burning with a possessive, protective fire. "You think a ticket and a new name will save you?" he asked softly. "Ji-hoon has spent 3 years turning you into his most valuable asset. If I let you walk out those doors, his men will pick you up before you reach the airport. They will drain you dry and discard the shell. I can take care of myself," she lied, her voice cracking. "No," Sung-ho countered, his thumb tracing the edge of her jaw. "You are a witness to a war that has only just begun. You offered me a ledger, Zariah, but you gave me a responsibility. You aren't leaving this house, not because you're a prisoner, but because you are the only thing in this city I am currently unwilling to lose." He let go of her chin, but the weight of his words remained, pinning her to the seat. "From this moment on, you are under my protection, and in my world, that means you are mine." The hum of the server racks was the only thing anchoring Zaraya to reality until the world suddenly went black. The silence that followed was more violent than a scream. High above the sleeping streets of Gangnam, the inner sanctum's red emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, bloody shadows across the obsidian floors. "They're here," Sung-ho said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. He didn't rush, he simply reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a sleek, suppressed handgun, checking the chamber with the practiced ease of a man who breathed conflict. Outside the reinforced glass, a series of muted thuds echoed, the sound of breaching charges hitting the outer perimeter. "Ji-hoon is sloppy," Sung-ho murmured, looking at the security monitors, which were now flickering with static. "He's desperate." "He's not sloppy, he's redirecting," Zaraya interjected, her fingers already flying across her tablet despite the tremors in her hands. "He didn't just cut the power, he's running a localized EMP burst to fry your external security nodes. He wants you blind so his team can funnel you toward the service elevators." A heavy boom shook the floor, and the sound of rapid gunfire erupted from the hallway. Sung-ho's men were engaging, but the static on the screens told a story of a tactical disadvantage. "I can't get the cameras back," Zaraya whispered, her brow furrowed in intense concentration. "But I can talk to the house. If I can bypass the main breaker, I can flip the lockdown protocols." "Do it," Sung-ho commanded, stepping toward the door to hold the line. Zaraya dove into the architecture of the building's nervous system. She wasn't just typing, she was hunting. She found the rogue code Ji-hoon's hackers had planted to keep the doors locked shut. With a sharp exhale, she executed a counter-command. Suddenly, the heavy pneumatic doors at the end of the hallway hissed open, but not for the attackers. By reversing the magnetic locks, she opened a secondary maintenance path behind the breach team. On the monitor, Sung-ho saw his tactical unit vanish into the shadows, only to reappear behind Ji-hoon's mercenaries. "The lights!" Zaraya gasped. "Now!" She slammed a final key. A high-frequency strobe light designed for riot control exploded in the hallway, blinding the invaders. In the strobe's chaotic pulse, Sung-ho's men moved like reapers, flanking the disoriented team with surgical precision. Sung-ho stood by the door, watching the feed as the threat was neutralized in seconds. He turned back to Zaraya. She was slumped over the desk, the blue light of the tablet illuminating the sweat on her pale face and the sheer, raw terror in her eyes. He had seen her as a ledger, a valuable object to be guarded, but as the screams in the hallway died down, he realized she was something far more dangerous. She was a weapon that didn't require a trigger. "You didn't just save the house," he said, walking back to her and placing a heavy, grounding hand on her shoulder. "You dismantled them." For the first time, he didn't see a victim to be protected. He saw a partner who could burn the world down beside him. The victory in the hallway was short-lived. Even as the strobe lights flickered out, the building's foundations groaned under a second, more powerful concussive blast. Ji-hoon wasn't just sending teams, he was leveling the fortress. "The perimeter is gone," Sung-ho said, his voice dropping into a register of calm that was more terrifying than a shout. He grabbed a heavy overcoat and draped it over Zaraya's shoulders, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second on her neck, a silent promise of safety. "We leave, now." They descended through a private freight elevator to the sub-basement, where a matte black armored sedan sat idling like a predator in the dark. Sung-ho shoved her into the passenger seat and took the wheel himself, the tires screaming as he launched the car through the concrete exit and into the neon-slicked labyrinth of Gangnam. They weren't alone for long. 3 silver SUVs emerged from the side streets, weaving through the midnight traffic with lethal intent. A spray of gunfire shattered the quiet of the city, the rounds pinging off the sedan's reinforced plating like hailstones. Sung-ho pushed the engine harder, the speedometer climbing into a range that made the city lights blur into long, jagged needles of blue and gold. "Hold on," he commanded, as a heavy vehicle lunged from a side alley, broad-sliding toward Zariah's side of the car. The impact was deafening, the armored glass spiderwebbed, a million crystalline fractures blooming inches from Zariah's face. Before she could scream, Sung-ho threw his body across the center console, shielding her with his own frame as a secondary volley of high-caliber rounds finally punched through the weakened driver-side pillar. Shards of glass sprayed across his back, and Zariah felt the sudden hot dampness of blood soaking into the sleeve of her coat where his arm pressed against her. He didn't make a sound. He simply righted himself, his face a mask of iron, and rammed the shifter into gear. With a violent jerk of the wheel, he pit-maneuvered the lead pursuer into a construction barrier and dove into the narrow, winding alleys of the old Mapo district. The glitz of the high-rises faded, replaced by low-hanging power lines and crumbling brick. Sung-ho killed the headlights, gliding the battered sedan into a nondescript garage beneath a weathered apartment block. The safe house was a jarring contrast to the marble halls of the penthouse. It was a single, cramped room, smelling of old paper and dust, lit by the flickering orange hum of a street lamp outside. Sung-ho slumped against the door as it locked, his breathing heavy and ragged. The impeccably tailored suit was ruined, drenched in rain and blood. Zariah watched him, the man who moved like gravity, now looking mortal in the dim light. In the silence of the old district, the distance between the boss and the ledger vanished. Here, they were just two people bleeding in the dark. The orange glow of the street lamp filtered through the blinds, casting slatted shadows across the small kitchen table. Sung-ho sat on a wooden chair that looked fragile beneath his frame, his shirt discarded on the floor. The sight of him was jarring. His back was a map of old violence, crisscrossed with silver lines and jagged marks that told a story far longer than his rise to power. Zariah's hands trembled as she dipped a cotton swab into antiseptic. "You're bleeding more than you're letting on," she whispered, her voice tight in the small space. "It's a surface wound," he grunted, though his jaw was clamped so tight the muscle jumped. "I've had worse from men I actually respected." She moved behind him, her fingers hovering over the raw lacerations from the shattered glass. As she began to work, the air between them grew thick, charged with the sudden, sharp intimacy of the quiet. The clinical detachment she usually relied on was failing her. Every time her skin brushed his, a jolt of electricity raced through her fingers, grounding her to him in a way she hadn't expected. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the old refrigerator. "You could have stayed in the driver's seat. You didn't have to shield me." Sung-ho turned his head slightly, his dark eyes catching the light. "I told you, you are my responsibility. In my world, we do not let our most valuable assets break." "Is that all I am?" Zariah challenged, pausing with the needle in her hand. "An asset? A ledger?" She moved around to face him, the light hitting the Viper brand on her collarbone. Sung-ho reached out, his fingers tracing the jagged scar with a reverence that made her breath hitch. "This mark was meant to break you," he murmured, his thumb lingering on her skin. "But you're still standing. My scars come from choices I made, to survive, to lead. Yours came from someone trying to steal your soul. There is a difference." The space between them vanished. The heat radiating from him was a physical force, drawing her in. Zariah realized then that the walls he built weren't to keep her in, but to keep the world out. He didn't look at her like a prisoner. He looked at her like a treasure he had finally found in the wreckage of his life. The tension spiked, a silent pull that made her heart hammer against her ribs. But Sung-ho didn't lean in. Instead, he took her hand, his grip steady and grounding. Ji-hoon thinks he's won because we're hiding, Sung-ho said, his voice dropping into a lethal, tactical whisper. He thinks you're the prize. We're going to let him keep thinking that. We need a plan to lure him into the open, one where he thinks he's catching you, but he's actually stepping into the grave I've dug for him. Zariah looked into his dark eyes and saw the Reaper waiting. Tell me what I need to do. The static on the burner phone felt like a physical weight in the small, dim apartment. Sung-ho's face was a mask of granite as he waited for the line to connect. When Ji-hoon's voice finally crackled through, smooth, arrogant, and dripping with false concern, Zariah felt a chill settle in her marrow. Brother, Ji-hoon drawled, I thought you'd be halfway to the border by now. I don't run from my own blood, Ji-hoon, Sung-ho replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. But I'm tired of the noise. The girl is wounded, she's slowing me down, and your men are making it impossible to move my assets. I want my roots back. I want the syndicate stable. And in exchange? The ledger, Sung-ho said, his eyes locking on to Zariah's. I'll give you the girl and the keys in her head. We meet at the Incheon docks tomorrow night. No shooters, no games. Just a trade for peace. There was a long, pregnant pause before Ji-hoon laughed. The cold-blooded Choi Sung-ho trading a woman for a quiet life? I almost believe you. Docks, midnight. Don't be late. As the line went dead, the silence of the safe house returned, heavier than before. Zariah stood by the window, watching the rain streak against the glass like tears. He thinks you've finally broken, she whispered. He thinks I'm a man who values power over people, Sung-ho said, walking toward her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, a delicate band of platinum set with a single dark diamond. It looked like an engagement ring, but when he pressed a microscopic indentation on the side, a tiny blue light flickered deep within the stone. This is a short-range digital transmitter, he explained, taking her hand. His touch was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold metal as he slid the ring onto her finger. The moment Ji-hoon connects his tablet to you to verify the keys, this will bridge the gap. It will bypass his firewalls and let you upload the kill switch virus directly into his central server. It will bleed his accounts dry before he even realizes he's been hit. He then tucked a micro earpiece, no larger than a grain of rice, into her ear. I will be in your ear the entire time. I will be watching through the scope. The moment the upload is complete, you drop to the ground. Zariah looked at the ring, then up at him. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it was a new, burning resolve. She wasn't just a ledger anymore. She was the bait in a trap designed by a man who would burn the world to keep her safe. One night, Sung-ho murmured, his hand lingering on hers. One more night in the dark, and then we take back the light. They spent the remaining hours in a state of hyper-focused preparation, the air between them charged with the electricity of an impending storm. In the quiet of the old district, they weren't just a boss and a victim. They were two hunters sharpening their blades for the final kill. The Incheon shipping docks were a graveyard of rusted iron and salt-crusted containers, illuminated only by the rhythmic, sweeping glare of a distant lighthouse. Rain fell in a heavy, freezing curtain, turning the pavement into a mirror of oil and ink. Zariah stepped out of the black sedan, the wind whipping her hair across her face, her fingers numb as they curled around the hem of her coat. Every step she took toward the center of the pier felt like walking toward her own execution. Ji-hoon stood 30 yards away, flanked by a wall of men with submachine guns. He looked every bit the usurper, dressed in an expensive camel hair coat that looked grotesque against the grimy backdrop of the docks. "Check her," Ji-hoon barked as Zariah reached him. A guard roughly patted her down, his hands lingering on her pockets, but he missed the micro earpiece and the ring that felt like a hot coal on her finger. Sung-ho's voice crackled in her ear, a low, steady hum of calm. "Breath, Zariah. I have him in the crosshairs. Just get him to connect." Ji-hoon stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a feverish greed. He didn't see a woman, he saw the billions of won she carried in her mind. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruisingly tight, and forced her to face him. "The prodigal ledger returns," he sneered, pulling a ruggedized tablet from his pocket. "I should have lobotomized you the moment I had you. It would have saved us both the theater." "Just take the keys and let me go," Zariah whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. He didn't respond. He grabbed her right hand, his eyes narrowing at the platinum ring. A gift from the boss. Touching. He pulled a localized data cable from the tablet and pressed the connector against the stone of the ring, expecting a handshake protocol to initiate the download. "Verified," Ji-hoon muttered as the screen turned green. "Beginning the transfer." Zariah felt the vibration of the ring against her skin. Now. Instead of the data flowing out, she triggered the sequence Sung-ho had taught her. The green bar on the tablet didn't fill, it turned a violent, flickering red. The kill switch virus didn't just stop the download, it traveled back through the cable like a lightning strike, infiltrating Ji-hoon's central servers. On the screen, account balances began to plummet, numbers spiraling toward zero in a frantic digital bleed-out. Ji-hoon's expression shifted from triumph to dawning horror as his empire began to vanish in real time. "What is this?" he roared, shaking the tablet as if he could stop the hemorrhage. "What did you do?" "I'm not a ledger, Ji-hoon," Zariah said, her voice suddenly cold and clear over the roar of the rain. "I'm the virus." "Drop!" Sung-ho's voice exploded in her ear. Zariah threw herself onto the wet pavement just as the first crack of a high-caliber sniper rifle shattered the salt-heavy air. The thunder of the sniper rifle was merely the opening note of a symphony of destruction. As Zariah pressed her face into the wet concrete, a series of rhythmic, bone-jarring concussions rocked the pier. Sung-ho had rigged the perimeter shipping containers. The resulting fireballs climbed into the rainy sky, turning the midnight gloom into a hellish orange noon. In the chaos, Ji-hoon's men scrambled, blinded by smoke and a deafening roar of the secondary explosions. Ji-hoon himself was on his knees, staring at the dead tablet in his hands, his billion-dollar empire erased by a string of code. He looked up, his face twisted in a mask of primal fury, reaching for the sidearm at his hip. He never cleared leather. Sung-ho emerged from the wall of fire and steam like a god of war. His long black coat flared behind him, his expression as calm as the eye of a hurricane. He didn't waste words. He fired 2 precise rounds into Ji-hoon's shoulder and knee, grounding the traitor instantly. Sung-ho didn't stop to gloat. He moved straight to Zariah, shielding her body with his own as he hauled her up from the pavement. "I have you," he murmured against her ear, his voice the only steady thing in a world of screaming metal. He didn't look back as his tactical teams swarmed the docks to mop up the remaining resistance, leaving a broken Ji-hoon for the sirens already wailing in the distance. 6 months later, the air was crisp and scented with expensive lilies inside the syndicate's high-altitude boardroom. The city of Seoul stretched out below them, a sea of lights that now moved to the beat of a different drum. The heavy oak doors swung open. Choi Sung-ho entered first, but he did not take his seat at the head of the table immediately. Instead, he stood aside, his hand resting at the small of Zariah's back. She was no longer dressed in the desperate black of a runaway or the borrowed bandages of a victim. She wore a tailored suit of ivory silk, her head held high, the Viper brand on her collarbone now partially obscured by a necklace of black diamonds. a gift from the man who had helped her turn that scar into a badge of survival. The board members, men who had spent decades fearing Sung-ho, watched in stunned silence. "Gentlemen," Sung-ho's voice echoed, cold and absolute. "The syndicate has functioned on muscle and tradition for too long. Today, we evolve." He gestured toward Zariah. "This is Zariah Mitchell. She is my partner, and as of this hour, the head of cyber intelligence. Her word is my command. Her shadow is my protection." Zariah looked across the table, her mind already running through the digital architecture of the city she now helped rule. She wasn't a ledger, a ghost, or a prisoner anymore. She was the architect of a new era. As she took her seat beside Sung-ho, his hand found hers beneath the table, his grip a silent, grounding promise. They were the Reaper and the Queen of Shadows, and the world was finally theirs.